Carol.
Right now he's drawing names. He's drawing numbers.
Oh, I thought he was going to be back.
No,
Oh, we're
he's
going to do it
gonna
at
be-
3. That's
yeah.
right. Okay. Sorry. Okay, good. That's 2:00.
Yeah.
It's at 2.
No, we're just changing the agenda. We got other things to do.
Yeah, I don't think so. So, but we'll do that then. Yeah, we'll do that then. Not right now. That's right. There's a note on here, reminder to myself. Thankfully, I can read. Okay, I'm going to call us to order. It's January 11th, 2024. It's 1:07 p.m. This is Rules Committee. And Madam Clerk, would you call the roll? I guess we could do introductions.
George Martinez. Daniel Boland.
Karen Bronga.
Scott Myers.
Kevin Cross.
Exalta.
Christopher Constant.
Cameron Perez Videa.
All right, and with us we have clerk, legislative staff.
Oh, you've got numbers on the phone.
Oh, I have also on the phone, Mr. Johnson. You there?
No, Mr. Soul. Sorry.
Mr. Salt.
Randy Schultz here. Thanks.
Right, thanks, Mr. Salt. Okay, now we have legislative staff.
Claire Ross, Legislative Services Director.
Allie Hartman, Legislative Services.
Okay, so we have quite an agenda today, lots going on. We have under introductions, above and beyond, an employee of the quarter. We have decided to hold those items until 2:00. Same with the report from the ombudsman, because he is down at the election center at this time, pulling tiles out, setting the alphabet for the election that's coming up. So we'll move right into reports. I actually don't have an in-depth report. I will speak a little bit about some observations and hopes. This is first Rules Committee of the year. You'll notice down below under new business a training. The clerk had asked me last week any ideas for what we could do for training, because we try to do some training at every one of these Rules Committee meetings. And so what popped into mind was points of order, points of information, appeals from the decision of the chair, and how members can kind of utilize the process to the best effect of their purpose here, being a legislator. And I'd hoped Mr. Johnson would be here. I'm sad that he left, because he had made some comments at the meeting Tuesday night that were germane to this section. And that was around this idea of, why is it that it's a free for all? Someone can make a motion when it's my item. I should have been able to move it. And so coming back up to my report, first, the agenda is interesting. The consent agenda, when a member pulls an item, we tend as a body to defer, I do as the chair, to the person who pulled the item to make the motion on the item that they pulled, because they have expressed a specific concern. So, Mr. Johnson, you there?
I am.
All right, so you missed the predicate. This is, again, later in the agenda, we have a training on points of order, points of information, appeals from the chair. I had just introduced into the conversation that you had said something at the meeting the other night that I wanted to speak about now. And that was in relationship to the order of operations of introducing ordinances, who gets to move and how. And what I had gone to in this discussion so far was that we have two processes that are generally how we operate. One is for the consent agenda. And for the consent agenda, the method there is it tends to be the individual who pulled the item is allowed the floor to make whatever motion or action that they want on that item. So that's the first part. On items we pull off the agenda from the consent agenda, we turn to that person. What would you like to do? Under the ordinances that we pass or resolutions under the main agenda, it could be the 11, 12, 13, 14, or 15, especially after a public hearing, the call of the chair is what's the will of the body. And when the call of the chair is what's the will of the body, it is effectively a free-for-all. It's who gets there first with a motion and a second. Now, Jasmine, the clerk who was there with me when that moment happened with that one specific item, we both came separately to the conclusion that it was one set of members who made the motion proper and second, not the initial sponsors of the motion. So the S version got on the floor first. And then through the night, we learned of other motions that are pretty confounding. This motion to substitute, which we'll come back to at another meeting. Both of us have had some conversations with the legal staff, and they're preparing a kind of analysis and presentation on that motion because it's very interesting. So, but to come back to the main point on that, it didn't break it, but it could have. Thank goodness the attorneys were there. Yeah, it has broken before. So the main point of that conversation is that on the consent agenda, it's the member who pulls the item who has put themselves effectively in the queue first by being the person who pulled it. Sometimes there's 3 people, but it's generally speaking the person who got there first, which when I go down the dais, I almost always start on the left. So maybe there's a little bias. Maybe I should alternate to give people an opportunity. But anyhow, that's generally how it tends to go. So I just want folks to know there is actually a method to the madness there, and it wasn't personal. It was process. And then I had another communication this week from a member who was feeling, I think, stressed out, or maybe hurt is a better word, by the tone and timbre of some of the conversations that are happening in certain parts of our process. And I'm not calling anybody out, but I want to say 2 things. One is, and this assembly has done a great job of this, that our procedure works best when we are all committed to working together. And still feelings happen. Like it could have been really rough the last hour if you were here between Mr. Cross and I. Could have been, but I think Mr. Cross has demonstrated a level of honorability in process where we can talk about hot things, and then when the conversation ends, we can let it go and be fraternal in this process. Like siblings. Yep, we can do it. But that's not always possible. And our meeting the other night, it was filled with tension and kind of yucky feelings for a lot of different items and reasons. And then there was a meeting at 9 in the morning or 9:15 in the morning where people hadn't had a chance even to have 8 hours off from what happened the night before. And that baggage carries forward if we don't have chance to discharge the tension. And even starting today, some had said maybe there's still some of that in the system from the other night. So we are a body, we are individuals, we all have our emotions and our kind of values and tensions and stuff going on in our lives that make coming together hard sometimes. So I ask everyone to continue doing what you're doing as best as you can to be civil and work together. Again, this body, compared to how it has been, is so much more civil and decent to each other, even at its worst, than how it has been. And then we also have a duty to recognize that a member who's sitting up here when they have the floor can say terrible things, can say very pointed things. When we get to that point, if it is there, the rules tell us that you should start speaking to the chair only, right? When you get there, the purpose of the process and the way we have it, when tensions rise, the rules are more important than when tensions are down, because we can be more flexible when things are calmer or less taxed. But when those moments happen, my advice to everybody is lean on the chair, talk to the chair. Mr. Chair, I feel this is not going right. Madam Chair, this is the process that I think should be happening. Then, of course, what happens if it's the chair who's the one that's causing you to have those feelings? And then you have to say that, Madam Chair, Mr. Chair, I think this isn't fair right now. I think it should be done in a different way. And I think this is why. And figure out a way to have those conversations. And if you're in a process, the record is on and things are happening, do your best to work through it there. And if you can't, ask for a break and pull it aside. But we're all adults. We have to work together, and we do a great job of working together. And I want us to continue doing that, where each and every one of you is able to make your commitment and deliver your effort to this collective process called the assembly. So that's generally my report, that we're really doing a great job, and let's be sensitive to each other. And you are still empowered to say what you feel you need to say because that is why you're elected. So anyhow, that's my report. I have a few other folks to report. Claire.
Thank you. Thanks to all of you for slowing down a little bit in December so we could catch our breaths. We've been doing a lot of 2024 planning on our team. One thing to note, the first thing is we've been wanting to do this for a couple of years and we've budgeted for it and we finally got the capacity to do it. We're sending out a progress report mailer to as many Anchorage households as we can. It's just going to be a real simple half sheet with some of your top 4 accomplishments and more information about how people can get involved in the assembly. We're really excited. We have a little survey people can take and a QR code so we can track responses and do some metrics to see how well it works. And we're just really excited about that because we know that you all have the goal to engage more of your constituents in this work. And so we'll see how that goes. That should be coming out in the next couple of weeks, I think. We are working with the child care and early education stand-up project for Prop 14 and the alcohol tax strategic plan. We continue to update the housing appropriations tracker when you appropriate more money to any homelessness or housing issues, so you can have some totals on that. And then next up, we are working on, I'm working with members Cross and Zalatal on a RFP to put out for pre-approved building plans for residential, and I'm working with building services on that as well. And an RFQ for the public restroom and sanitation survey to figure out where, if the bond passes, where the restroom should be located, what their maintenance schedule should be, all that, the logistics that would accompany that. And if it doesn't pass, it'll be all ready for the next time you seek to get funding for that. We are also on standby on your project to take municipal management of 5th and 6th Avenue. That should be coming up in the Transportation Committee next week. And we have some, we're tracking that and have some possible resolutions to get that moving along if needed. And then a little fun project that inspired by Mr. Martinez and Mr. Constance's trip to an arts and music conference. We are going to be updating the music that gets played in assembly meetings. I don't know if you watch it on TV, and on the breaks it has that very interesting, I think you call it lounge music
From the 80s.
from the 80s, which those of us in the press box like to dance to during breaks, but we'll give it up when the time comes to get some more music from local Alaska artists on that. Anchorage specific. Anything else I'm missing? That's our report for this month.
Thank you. Madam Clerk, Jamie.
Thank you. So the budget analyst position is posted, and we are currently recruiting for the budget analyst position. And the RFP documents for the video center at Assembly Chambers has been submitted to purchasing. So that should be hitting the street here in the next week or so. I don't know if we've talked about this, but Mr. Crabb is retiring in June, and so the clerk's office is taking over management of a contract to manage the video center there. So the election team is gearing up. Candidate filing begins tomorrow, and then once all of the propositions are adopted on the 23rd, they will begin building the ballot, and that's all I can think of.
A lot going on. Okay, so I think, do we do the training first or the work plan first? What do you think, Madam Clerk? I think let's do the work plan first, in case that takes a little bit more time than we think. So.
Yay, I love planning. So at the last rules meeting, you set your priorities, and this is still rough draft form. If you have any edits, there is a paper in your packet that talks about your priorities and goals. And so you set your 5 priorities as housing action, municipal workforce, Port of Alaska modernization, public health, safety, and quality of life, and fully functional municipal services. So if you have any edits to that, be sure to bring it up today. And then the next step is to fill out your goals for the year. And I didn't bring, we were out of copies and I didn't want to print more, But at last month's session, I brought the example of the 2023 work plan, and that had your 2022 accomplishments and your 23 goals. So this is essentially recreating that document for this year. So we're just going to walk through the goals. You've got it in front of you, and we have butcher paper up there that we'll take notes on and write more. So a lot of you think you got goals to me, so that this isn't completely empty to start with. And I'm sure this will trigger all sorts of thoughts of things you want to add. One thing of note, I think I mentioned this last time, but this plan started in 2019 when the whole assembly got together for a strategic planning meeting with Foraker Group, and you created, or that group then created, the priorities and goals. And the priorities have changed, morphed each year, but the way that the goals are grouped are remaining from that original plan. We've kind of added some things. So the way we have them grouped might not work anymore. So I think you could change them up if you wanted. For instance, economic development was a big goal from 3 years ago. And while it's still obviously a big goal, you've kind of worked that into some other areas. So I'm just putting that out there. If you want to change the groupings, that's a possibility too. So with that, I think I'll stop talking, and we have the butcher sheets up there. So if we'll just go through all of them, and you can shout out things for us to add. And the first one is economic.
Go ahead, Daniel.
Okay, so my question is, I feel like this is like, it keeps swirling in the background, and I keep hearing from different folks in the community about this. Are there members who are working on some form of a sales tax?
I believe the answer is yes. We had that previous report from 3 members that there were some,
So-
but that doesn't preclude other members from also working on something. I think when you do member updates, there's the opportunity to let folks know if you are or interested, if there
Right.
aren't 3 in a particular group.
I'm just wondering if that should be included under our economic development goals, because I think that's going to be like a big thing. It's going to take a lot of a sales tax or some
So
form.
I'm hearing that one shouted out.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm going to also defer to Mr. Solt on the phone, because you did put the MAPS, metropolitan area projects. Is that related to the sales tax?
That is probably that initiative, and it's being driven by AEDC and a committee as well.
Okay, that is helpful. Thank you.
Okay, so we're adding sales tax and AEDC to that first bullet point under economic development goals. Any other shout outs here for goals? I will let you all know that I pre-emailed mine in, so mine are captured already.
Understanding and addressing economic disparity in the equity.
Say it again into the mic, please. Thank you.
Thank you. Understanding and addressing the economic equity disparity challenges in Anchorage.
I have one, I'm not sure it goes up here, but it's a revision of the procedures of the community council system. It's like a wholesale review of the community council system.
Quality and transparent municipal operations. So community council review.
It's a review of the community council code section and procedures of operation. To ensure the system is adding value. Go ahead.
I was gonna say, reading this list, plus the ones we've just added, I feel like we've like captured quite a bit already. Like if these are 1-year goals, there's a lot here.
So is it up here? I don't know, my glasses are maybe need to be a little stronger now. Recruitment and retention, the workforce piece that's on there. Okay, good. Under the same section there, okay.
I was gonna say if you put something up here, you need to take ownership of it because it doesn't do any good if you have a list of goals and then no one works on them. And so some of them obviously fit into committees or existing ordinances. But if you're adding new things, you should also probably be thinking of mechanisms to get it before a committee or into action.
For example, my community council one, I've already recruited Anna and Daniel to lead the project.
I have one on there. Form I just introduced that's going to go on the next CDC meeting, which is amending the open space requirements for multifamily construction.
Yeah, I did have that question because.
And you might say that's under review resident. I mean, so
But you
that's
think there's
more of a
more,
broader.
But okay.
I mean, I just want to let you guys know that I have an AO that's been drafted and it goes before the CDC. I worked with planning on it. Actually came out of the planning department. We worked on it for several months now, which is amending and reducing open space requirements for multifamily construction. And basically the gist of it reduces in many of the different zonings, open space requirements, and then eliminates it entirely if you're within a quarter mile of a public park and things like that for larger developments. So, and they actually, when I brought that to their attention months ago in a meeting, said, actually, we've been considering that, something we've been working on. So rather than belabor Dean with one more item on their desk, I just worked through planning to get it. So thank you.
So is there a way we could do, like, I know we end up putting out, but for our draft purposes, maybe we should put people's initials or names beside these so we kind of get a sense of who's planning or working on things, right? And then as we move toward our final that we publish, we obviously will, because we usually adopt these by resolution, we'll all own them. But in the meantime, that way, if there aren't enough, or if there aren't 3 and you were thinking similar, then there would be the opportunity to jump on, because this is a lot of work on
Yes.
this list.
I have one other thought. I wonder if there's any interest, because I'm thinking, this is our work plan, and this can be our work plan regardless of whether there's a change in administration or not. And so I'm wondering if there's still interest to pursue a stormwater utility or some type of impervious surface tax, something to kind of disincentivize parking lot land speculation.
Isn't that captured, I thought, but maybe not, or maybe we need to refine that under investigate infrastructure funding solutions. That's the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6th bullet down on housing goals.
So when I read that, I was thinking, how could we fund actually putting in like utilities or infrastructure? Like for instance, Third and Ingra, right? There's a master plan for that, but it's going to take according to the plan, which was developed a number of years ago, 2.5 million, I think it was, to put in the infrastructure to allow that project to happen. So that's kind of what I thought that was referencing. But I think that could be inclusive of both of those ideas. Do we do an infrastructure bank, or we also did that congressionally directed spending request for the conversion of the McKinley Bank building next to the gas light that needs utilities. So how can we do some of these conversions from commercial space to residential?
So should I add it on to this one or put it under infrastructure as its own?
I think it's not specific to housing necessarily. I mean, it is an
I
effort to
don't.
have more development of housing or commercial space.
I mean, I tend to agree with you. I would move the whole infrastructure funding solutions to an infrastructure
Infrastructure.
thing, right? Because infrastructure allows then the development of lots of things.
Right.
Infrastructure is the the ground level. Haha.
As well as a resource to fix our stormwater system.
I'll highlight, it seems like you all are jumping around a little bit. So I just noticed that there's one goal under assembly business goals. I wanted to highlight that there are a couple of different projects underway that have the potential to really package your assembly meetings nicely, including the camera upgrade process, and then this local music project. So you could have a goal that is well underway to that effect.
There's definitely nothing wrong with having a smaller list and then a longer list. So if you don't have more to add,
I have one more to add.
Okay.
Under assembly business goals, equitable funding for the legislative branch.
I also have one for that category.
Okay.
And I don't know how to word it exactly, but it's to build and strengthen relationships with their branches of government, meaning the state and the federal government. It's some effort going into systematically improving those relationships. I'm sad that Anna's not.
cool. I like that it's a little shorter than last year's, so maybe more manageable and you can really hone in on your focus. I'll be putting out a new draft of this, so there's still a chance to get things if you remember anything major. I also did want to do one other thing. Last year, you had asked to do an annual review of your committee structure each year. And I think since you just recently changed it up by adding transportation, you probably don't need a big discussion, but I wanted to flag that for you if anyone wants to talk about committee structure, meeting times, or anything like that as part of your annual review. A couple of years ago, you had asked to do a review of the committees annually, just to make sure you had the right ones, the right meeting times, the right membership. And so January is the time for that. And I felt like it fit nicely with this work plan. So I just wanted to open it up in case you wanted to have a discussion on that.
And so I would offer that I think that it is a timely and important conversation as we roll around to the beginning of the new municipal year, if you count it as the certification of an election, when reorganization may happen. That's kind of the time to be ready with new structures and updates to our committee mission and membership. And so I don't think we can do this today. I think we can start the conversation today about doing it, but I would welcome a process to have each committee think about itself. Are we still meeting the mission? Does it need to be something else? And without, the goal is not to add more committees again, because we're all taxed in time, but to figure out, can we streamline, reorganize, and do better? And as Ms. Zalatil pointed out, I'm loath to make direction to committees, but I am going to give a direction that any committee that has a regular meeting that could fall on the day after a regular assembly meeting, so that's Wednesday, so there's really only one committee, I think. I want to set a benchmark that committee doesn't meet until noon, because there's just a dynamic in effect where it's too taxing and toxic to not have enough rest, to have to come back. And public safety is another one that could happen, where we need to find another time slot. We had a staff person who, worked all day, drove home for 30 minutes, and then had to be back in their car and driving back to town by 8:30, had to get ready for sleep. So they had like 5 hours to themselves between their shift days, and it's not proper. And so I'm going to kind of put down a line and say those committees need to find an alternative day and time. It could be just for those that fall after regular assembly meetings, which is, as soon as we publish the annual calendar, we could look out and say, these are the ones that get changed. But the expectation is there will be no committee meetings the day after a regular meeting before noon. So, Mr. President,
Thanks. Just a quick thought about committee's structure, purpose, new year and opportunity. I'm curious about your thoughts. This group's thoughts about the role that committees play in general, and whether that's really a decision or a conversation to be happening within that committee of itself, where that committee, plans time to talk about the purpose of this committee, what role this committee plays, how should it be structured, that sort of thing, or whether that's a larger conversation about committees as a whole, as our committees are, many of them are different and function different ways. So I'm curious about that. I'm particularly interested in this role that committees play, where it's simply it's become almost just a communication space, where it's it's an opportunity for the administration in the different departments to come forward and to share information, and there is and it's not necessarily used in the same way as a space to that translates into work that comes to the assembly, but it's primarily communication. And so I'm trying to figure out, and I'm thinking about the Public Safety Committee as a space where we, the chiefs of police and fire and the Department of Law and that sort of thing. It's become like a space where they all just report out everything that they're doing. And I think there's value in that. I'm just not sure that that's what the purpose of that committee really is. And so I don't know if other committees are wrestling at all with the role of their committee, or whether that's the right role or not. But that in particular is something that's interesting to me. And we can hold that conversation at the committee itself, which is fine. But I didn't know if that's something that would be valuable for committees as a whole, because I think the role of the committees has changed based on the administration, based on the needs. But just want to share that. Thanks.
Ms. Zalatil.
Thanks. So I'm glad that you brought up the Public Safety Committee. So I've stopped regularly attending it because it is just generally a report out. I went to the last one because there was a specific ordinance referenced that we were going to be voting on. And so like enterprise and utility oversight often reviews upcoming legislation specifically, or actions that utilities or enterprises are asking us to take. And we really do try to keep the agenda in that way. Budget finance, on the other hand, is a set of reports, but those set of reports all are related to the workflow of first quarter budget, tracking expenditures kind of in real time so we can answer questions about the fiscal health and then set us up for budget opportunities. And that's how we view that committee. And we're really working with the CFO and the OMB director to have them inform us about what things would help make those routine legislative opportunities work better for them, because they hate when we have really complicated finance questions on the dais. So we're trying to make sure that that's useful. So I appreciate the comment. I would love to see any legislation related to a committee that we know is coming well in advance to go there instead of a work session. I think that would be fantastic, because legislation that runs through CEDC, I know the process it runs through at CEDC. I don't necessarily need to be there, but I trust the process. I know what it runs through. And then I know if I have questions about it, I can just go listen to that meeting, and that we don't have to then do another work session. Having worked with Chris now for a little while and working on the calendar, it's a nightmare. And I would really like there to be enough space in work sessions that if we postpone an item in a meeting because we really do need a work session, that there's room for that work session to occur fairly quickly so we don't have to postpone items way out.
Mr. Martinez.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I wanted to echo the support of the idea of utilizing the committees to not necessarily to reduce the amount of work sessions that may necessarily otherwise be required. I think that is an important goal. We have, our pacing and our frequency at CEDC, to the point of the chair, workflows have changed, but because we still have a regular 2 meeting a month kind of routine, it still gives us an opportunity to more often not have to have a work session on things that would come through our committee, and utilize the actual committee time for doing that work. So I just wanted to second that. And I also wanted to thank the chair for, you described holding the line on the Wednesdays. I think it's important, but you've also, I think the establishment of the Friday routine, of the no work Friday, or the no work sessions. Friday's not no work. There's always work going on.
No
but
meetings.
Yeah, the no meetings. I think that's helpful. Not only for our time, but just to put a point on it, a lot of the other hats that we wear in terms of the assembly hats, like the liaison roles, I have not been able to attend with any regularity the chamber meetings because of the Fridays. But this Friday, I will be able to attend the chamber meeting because it falls on a no work Friday, no work session Friday. So thank you for that.
Right. So I have myself in the queue, and I'll reply that when I'm not the chair sometime in the future, I hope future leadership recognizes the goal that we have, that our recruitment and retention is a core value, that we need to make sure in our house that it's the strongest it can be if we're going to look at the other side of the house and try to ensure that it is there. And so I've achieved that in my work by ensuring we have no meeting Fridays, that staff can be flexible in their work, that if the work is getting done, I don't need to think about it. And so I am doing my best to create space for nothing on the calendar as much as possible. That said, as Ms. Alato said, is high density. It is a very intense molecule. It's like uranium. It's all spinning around a lot. But that said, I think to your point, Mr. President Dia, I think that the committee should have 2 functions. One is the opportunity for departments to liaise with us. That is a very good goal, but it shouldn't be the only function, right? And so, like the Public Safety Committee has almost moved into a rote process where we get the same reports by the same people time and time and time. And so in some ways that gets to that, well, that could have been an email, right? And so I think that figuring out a way to generate the relationships and the opportunity and the understanding to the department heads that this is the time and place to meet, and we're going to call you here sometimes, you should be here, is good. But it shouldn't be the sum total of the work. And the work should also be analyzing the important questions that are coming through us. Each committee should look at that for itself, and we should have this talk as a whole. It wasn't on the agenda for today, and we shouldn't spend too much more time on this, but it is a very important question. And if I had my way, I would look at all of our major departments and I would find a way that each of the committees that we have, well, not each, that as a total, all of the committees that we have, each of those department heads has an understanding that this is the place for their being called to come and participate and be a part of the conversation. It's more complex than it sounds, but maintenance and operations, where do they go? There isn't a committee for them. And so it would be nice to be able to have a built-in process once a month or so where the leadership of maintenance and operations knows to show up. And then if we have questions relating to their department, there would be a natural forum to ask those questions. I haven't been able to figure out how to square that, but each department head should have a committee that they are subject to in my perfect world, but my perfect world is too congested with stuff to add. So that would be my 2 cents. We'll return back to the question of committees. It's a really important, maybe we'll do that next month. Well, Ms. Alatel and I will both be gone next month, the Rules Committee. That's good to notify again. Mr. Rivera will be chairing the meeting of the 13th and Mr. Presverdia will be vice chairing. So I know Mr. Rivera is very skilled at running meetings, but he's rusty. And so I'm asking everyone to be real gentle with him. And if we can find a way not to send too many super hot topics to that agenda so that I don't scare members off any more than they've already been scared off. So with that, Ms. Boggy, had your hand up?
So I just was wondering about the community liaison, like Visit Anchorage it's a lot of meetings, a lot more than I expected. And I do appreciate being involved in it, but they want you at government relations and their board meeting. And then there's some things that have come up in between. And is
have
there
some
someone else
advice.
that is?
I have some advice.
Okay.
Choose your own adventure. You are the policymaker. Don't let them tell you when to be there. You tell them, I have this much time. And you can prioritize them and the organization. I was supposed to be doing some of that work, but I don't have the time. And so my answer back to any member with any of those liaison roles is you tell them, this is how much time I have. And you are the one who is the sovereign in this question of your time. And so I want to support everybody to understand. And some of us have really good boundaries about that. They're like, just nope, not going to do it. Not just no, hell no. Just don't have the last name Volin and you won't be voluntold. So, but that's my suggestion in managing those commitments is let Julie know, hey, it's just too much. I can do one meeting a month and that meeting is going to be, you decide which is the best one. Assert your time, reclaim your time, as Eleanor Olmsnart would say. So anyone else on this item? No? Okay. So I think we got a lot up there for the priorities. It might be another round of boiling them down. I don't know. I'll leave that up to you to come up with a package for it that works best. I assume we'll have this by AIM, or do we want to approve it by resolution?
I thought you said 8 a.m.
No. Mr. Cross?
I don't expect you to jump up and write on this board again, but one just occurred to me. Under your under quality and transparent municipal operation goals, when you say fully staffed, I know that in the past we've discussed, and it's come up again more recently, both at CEDC meetings and the building department mentioned this again at Anchorage Home Builders, is allowing some of our departments or looking at that HR hiring process and allowing some of our departments to have more involvement because the pipeline is backlogged. And I don't know where that fits, but that is something to look at, is what does that process look like to get qualified applicants to the departments? And again, that 30, 60, 90-day waiting period for a response. Good people are not going to wait that long.
Yep.
So
I'll jump in there.
A more specific item.
It's great to put that up there under the recruitment and retention is understanding HR processes. And Mr. Salt asked for, and I think next week, maybe? Next Friday, we'll be having a work session with HR with a comprehensive set of questions that have been developed. We're intending to send it out by tomorrow. Members will see the questions tomorrow and you can add to it. The idea is give them a week to prep themselves for the conversation. So it's not, just a last minute explosion of, I can't answer any of that. And so Tyler has replied, he'll participate, and he's looking forward to the questions in advance so they can answer them. And as I said earlier, like a nesting doll, I imagine the answers will create a whole lot more questions. And so it will become more of a process, probably several work sessions as we zoom in on what those barriers are. So it's fair to put it up here. Yeah.
I will add that. And then in response to your question, it is an assembly resolution that I'll probably show you all one more draft and
Yep.
then we'll submit a resolution.
Perfect. Thank you. Anything else on that? So we changed up our agenda a bit, and we said we would take on 2:00 Mr. Hess's issues, but he has like 4 issues on the agenda. Daryl, you have issues. So seeing how I have you making 2 reports, one is an unfinished business item, a community council boundary changes. One is a report from the Equal Rights Commission. We'll start there and then get to the fun stuff after. Fun after. Fun at 2.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Chris. My name is Daryl Hess, and I am the current chair of the Anchorage Equal Rights Commission, and I was asked to give an update on the commission. You should have the written document that I provided to the clerk's office. I started out, I pulled some information from the December executive director's report. I started by listing the commissioners. Currently, as of last week, there were 3 commissioners who have current valid terms. One of them was appointed last February, one last March, and one last summer. So it's a way of saying out of those 3 commissioners, none of them even have 1-year experience. Unfortunately, over the past few months, 4 commissioners have resigned, and all of them were appointed within the last 2 years. My term expired October 14th. I'm currently in my 120-day extension, and Commissioner Klump's term expired on October 14th. He is currently in his 120-day extension. I know he was only appointed last July by the current administration. He has requested reappointment. I expect he will be reappointed. And you approved, the assembly Tuesday evening approved an individual to fill seat number 9, and the applicant for seat number 8, I believe, was moved to the next assembly agenda on the 23rd. So I know every administration likes to appoint their own people to boards and commissions, but having served on 5 commissions and having staff too, I will say it can be problematic when you have a lack of institutional knowledge. So currently, I am the only person serving on the Equal Rights Commission that has more than 11 months experience. So as chair of the commission, if a complainant files a request for reconsideration, the chair determines whether or not to grant the request and appoints a 3-commissioner panel to review that case file, and then the 3-commissioner panel determines whether or not to grant reconsideration. Unfortunately, recently I've had to appoint myself as the chair of every one of those panels because none of the other commissioners have experience. So not having institutional knowledge on boards and commissions can be problematic for those boards and commissions. I just want to put that out there. So the AERC currently has 3 investigators, an executive assistant who was recently hired and has really come on board great guns. She's doing a great job, and an executive director. There's funding for 1 more investigator, and a request to post for the position was sent to HR 2 or 3 weeks ago. So that should be posted hopefully in the near future. The agency received 16 inquiries and perfected one new complaint in December. If you can look at the numbers over the last few years between 2016 and 2022, inquiries really started dropping during COVID. There was a lot of issues, I think, with a lot of our agencies. Our walk-ins in the ombudsman's office dropped by 300 a year during COVID, and we've had trouble getting those numbers back up. The number of new complaints has tanked, and I think that is a couple of reasons. The commission hasn't been doing the outreach that we did in the past. And I think it's also been impacted by the commission's reputation in the community. The fact that it was taking so long to process cases has had a negative impact on the commission's reputation in the community. So if you look further back, I talk about how all of the 2020 cases were processed and all but one 2021 case was processed. But what it doesn't say is recently all of the remaining 2018 and 2019 cases were processed. So there were open cases from 2018 and 2019. So when an agency has cases that are open for 3 or 4 or 5 years and they haven't been processed, that's a problem. A lot of it had to do with staff turnover. Part of it had to do with the electronic case management system that the commission uses. So the commission is going to be switching to a new case management system that will be a lot more efficient, easier to operate, and a lot less expensive. A lot of it had to do with staff turnover, and a lot of it had to do with the way the agency was processing cases. So when our new executive director came in a year ago in August, he and I had a discussion, and we did not have most agencies that we talked to up and down the West Coast and across the country have spreadsheets that the investigators use to track their cases that have a timeline. It keeps them on track. The Anchorage Equal Rights Commission didn't have any tool like that. So that was implemented, and it has really helped get the agency back on track. The 3 investigators we have now are doing an excellent job. I'm sure all of you saw an email from a constituent a few months ago involving a complaint that they had filed with the commission regarding their service animal that had been attacked by another dog. That case was 1,400 days old and the investigation had not even been opened. So they were withdrawing it. So the goal of the commission, the investigators, the executive director is committed that all of the backlog cases will be processed by the end of March. We're on track to do that. And once we get to where the commission needs to be, the goal is to not fall behind again. And so then we will start hitting the outreach pretty hard as we did in the past. But right now, it would be, I think, problematic and not a good idea to be doing extensive public outreach when you have 62% of your open cases are over 240. And that's a bad number, but 240 is much better than 1,800 or 2,200 days or 1,500 days. So I will say out of that 62%, the number of days is much lower than it was 6 months ago. So I think the commission understands there's a problem, has been working on it, and
Daryl, I have a question for you.
sure.
So you started by kind of recounting when we got behind and then the change of complaints that went down, 2020, 21, 22. It's hard to imagine that the issues relating to violations went down. Maybe people are starting to behave better because of a pandemic, but what's your assessment now that you've done this all this year? Why complaints are down? And like the argument that we're catching up is great, but it's also has to be moderated by the idea that people aren't complaining right now because
So I think when you look at offices like the Anchorage Equal Rights Commission, during COVID, the office was closed most of the time. The staff was working remotely. And quite frankly, an investigative agency like the AERC, I don't know if working remotely is really an effective tool. Most of the complainants like to walk into the office. They want to talk to somebody. Many of them may not have a computer, may not be computer literate. So trying to get people to file online or call up, I don't think it worked. And that coupled with the amount of time it was taking to respond to complainants, I think the commission's brand is very damaged in the community right now. Very damaged. And the only way to get it back up is to get all of these backlog cases processed and to then really start doing the community outreach to let people know we've caught up, where your case will be processed. I think they have to make a commitment. We have to make a commitment, the commission, that people will be contacted within a certain timeline and that their case will be processed, will be opened within a certain timeline. I've had people contact me that I had referred to the commission that their case was 1,200 days old and the investigation had not been opened. That's unacceptable.
Thanks. So just to be really clear, before I asked you that question, you had made the comment that you don't think it's in the best interest to do an outreach campaign because we're still far behind, but we're catching up. And at some point
Correct.
there will be a flip. And at that point, whenever that point is to be determined, then we should do an outreach campaign to kind of, we're
Yes.
back, we're healthy, we're ready.
Yes.
We can hear you.
I would
Okay.
say March.
Thanks. Ms. Zolotel.
So, and if there's a report you need to point me to, please do so. I'm curious, I'm assuming most of the complaints that come in are resident complaints and not filed by attorneys.
Yes.
Okay. Do we know what percentage are filed and requesting a right to sue letter, right? Because this is one way to exhaust your administrative remedies to go on to court. The Anchorage
So-
Equal Rights Commission has always been a wonderful mechanism to simply exhaust your administrative remedies and move on to court.
So I can answer that question, but I can get you the answer. But I will say, in discussions I've had with Keoki, the executive director, the number of requests, he made a statement to me that the number of requests for right to sue letters had gone up, that people had filed. And because we suspected it was because it was taking so long in some cases, that the complainants were withdrawing their complaints and asking for a right to sue letter.
Great. So that refines my request, which is what percentage are requesting a right to sue letter? And kind of at what point? Because it's only 180 days is all you have to
Right.
wait. And it's interesting that they're withdrawing the request. And is it considered a withdraw at that point by the AERC? Versus just it was dispensed with because the right to sue letter was issued?
I can't answer that question.
Okay.
But I can get the answer. But so what they're doing is they're withdrawing the complaint.
Okay, interesting. And the reason I'm asking is it's interesting how people use this commission, right? There are a couple, got a couple of uses. I mean, one is to get a complaint and move into hopefully a posture of mediation and resolution. Some is for a full investigation and some is to exhaust this administrative requirement. And so there are various lanes and all are valid uses of the commission. They just take different resources and time. Thank you.
Okay, on this, anyone else? I think we'll call it good. I know we have a brief report on the community council boundaries. Daryl, go ahead.
All right. Well, thank you. So phase one of the Community Council District Boundaries 10-year review project, the public process was completed at the end of September when the 12-member committee gave approval to its recommendations compiled over the course of 5 public meetings regarding nearly 40 boundary study areas that have been brought forward. The Planning Department's Long Range Planning Division is working on compiling a report with the recommendations from staff and the committee along with maps and the proposed community council boundary adjustments. This work should be completed this quarter. So in this quarter, the planning department will release the report and recommendations as a public hearing draft. There'll be a 2-month public comment period during which planning staff will seek formal comments in the form of resolutions from all community councils potentially affected by the proposed changes. Then there will be a public hearing at the Planning and Zoning Commission, most likely in April, and PZC's recommendations along with the public comments will be forwarded to the Assembly, most likely in May, for a final public hearing and action.
So Daryl, and this is for the clerk as well. We have a pending slight reapportionment boundary modification coming relating to split precincts and boundary issues in relationship to state boundaries that were finalized after we'd finalized our boundaries. And so I think it would be, I would ask you to communicate to the planning staff that that conversation has been pended until after the election, because we don't feel it's valid use of our legislative power to be meddling with any of the boundaries during an election. And so it'll come May. And so probably these two will come to a point. I don't know where the contractor's work is at this point on providing a lay of the land for where the boundaries will slightly modify. Some of them will have no change of people because there's no one that lives there. They're just land. But I think maybe it would be beneficial at some point for you and the clerk to have a conversation about the nature and scope of that project so that you, when this final project comes up, we don't find ourselves slightly making a mistake. So just a thought.
Okay. We will talk.
Yeah, again, it's not going to be a big project. It will be small, but anytime you talk about boundaries and lines, you need good process. So I notify. Okay, so is that good for that report? Any questions? I can see none. Now's the time. Does someone want to go out and the fun part? Why don't you go ahead and grab them? We're going to have Claire go out and grab them. We're going to do on the agenda, roll back up to Above and Beyond award.
Chris, did you want to?
I'll hand them out, but yeah. Here.
Did you want me to say something? or-
I do. I don't have the nomination form.
I don't have it, but I can word it.
I'll defer to you. What? You're in trouble now, Mike.
Where's Andy?
Is Andy around today?
Where's
Andy?
Andy? Oh, a new cop to call.
Yeah, get him down here, both of you.
Call him on down. Okay. Chris is going to present. Chris, did you want to?
Not yet. I'll come around, but
Oh, they're so mobile. Yes.
and so far they don't create too many feedback loops,
They seem to work.
except when they don't.
Classic.
I think Cameron broke us today.
Probably. This might wasted it.
It's so weird. Some of them just choose to stop working randomly. Some of them have like static and crushing foil sound. Gentlemen, welcome. So we, on a monthly basis, if we can, quarterly, if we don't have enough, I guess, we like to recognize individuals in our community who go above and beyond. And it was reported to us recently that we know on a daily basis, you deal with all manner of interesting and challenging human interactions. More than probably anyone, because there's no toilets in downtown. This is the only open space, and it's hard. And we wanted to take a moment to recognize you as having gone above and beyond for the municipality. Daryl.
So, Mike and Andy, Heather in my office a couple of weeks ago, you had a interesting constituent who came into City Hall. The individual was threatening to kill the guards, was using racial slurs, and Heather was so impressed with how professional you were and how you managed to, calm down the situation. So I will say the state ombudsman's office is not open for walk-ins to the public. They're only open by appointment. And there's a lot of offices that are going to that model these days. And the ombudsman's office is located on the first floor of City Hall. And the reason we've managed to stay open as a public office is because of our guards. They do an incredible job. They are respectful to everybody who comes in City Hall, but they are also firm and ensure the safety of the public and our employees. But what really stands out to me is how they treat everybody with respect, regardless of who they are.
Right. So next on the agenda is Legislative Employee of the Quarter. We like to recognize on our branch those staff who go above and beyond as well and who are really an asset to the functioning of the assembly, which, depending which office you're in, everybody is doing exceptional work. We had a number of nominations, and then this one was nominated 2 quarters in a row. And last quarter, we had someone who was nominated the quarter before, so it's very competitive. And this quarter, the nomination that leadership decided to recognize as Employee of the Quarter is Brandy Heasley. So, come on, we want to thank you for being the glue that keeps our legal team working. And the reality is, and I'll fight someone on this, the most high functioning and skilled legal department in the municipality is on the second floor, and you make that possible. So thank you so much. And for you, like every one of our assembly branch employees of the quarter, you have to construct your own trophy because that's how our branch operates. We do it together. So
She has a rare skill. She can herd cats.
yeah.
Hey, how's it going?
I'm gonna line you up next to
So I don't know if you just got turned on the mic and Carrie. They called me.
Hey, Randy, can you say that again?
Oh, sorry.
Okay.
Sorry.
All right, so next, two more items on the agenda are the members' discussion of pending business, which will come after this training. And we have, I think, 40 minutes left. So I think we can spend 20 minutes on this training and still have enough time to go around the room and discuss pending projects. So, Madam Clerk, Jamie, welcome to the table.
Thank you. So Christopher did a lot of explaining this earlier, but we wanted to talk about points of information, points of order, and appeals from the decision. And so starting off with, I think, points of information, I just want to point out that points of information take precedence over anything else that's on the floor at the moment. And so you can use that at any time. Maybe you have a question, you have a question that you still need answered from staff, or you've been focused on this other agenda item that is coming up here in the future, and you lost where you were. I lose where I am. There's a lot happening up there, and so it's not a problem to need to be reminded where we're at. And so you're always welcome to do a point of information. It doesn't need a second. It takes precedence over anything else that's happening. And so we just wanted to say that you can certainly use that at any time. You can also use it if you're not sure what motion we're voting on right now. And, we try to put it up on the screen, but sometimes I'm not so quick at getting it up on the screen. So again, that's another time that you can use a point of information. The other one I want to talk about is the point of order.
Go ahead, Mr. President.
So I think you did a great job of explaining what it is. I'm curious what it isn't. And so we have seen at times a point of information used to further argue a point for a variety of reasons. So can you help us to both understand what it is not, what is not an appropriate point of information, and also at what point does the chair need to step in and interrupt the person doing a point of information because it's not a point of information. In fact, it's something else, and sort of how that process works. Thanks.
Sure. So a point of information can be used as a parliamentary inquiry. So if you have a question about what might be in order as far as we're in a motion, maybe there's a motion to amend on the table, and you want to ask if we can amend the amendment, or so any parliamentary inquiry. A request for information that's exactly what it says, a request for information.
So just
It's
a clarification.
directed to the chair,
Okay. That's
through
fine.
the chair, to another officer or member, or for information relevant to the business at hand, but not related to parliamentary procedure. So I would interpret that as a request for information of somebody else on the body, or a member of the administration, a director who's there to,
But it has to go through the chair.
through the chair.
So I can't do a point of information and say I'd like so and so to come up and to share more about some information. I mean, that's what I'm wondering is the point of information?
No, I think you can say,
can.
I have a question for, the OMB director, and here's the question, and then the chair would invite the OMB director to come answer.
But the chair has the ability to determine whether that is an appropriate point of information or not.
Yeah, so I don't think that a point of information would be used to take the floor to ask a question of a member of the staff. A point of information is, I think it's more in relationship to getting clarity on what we're doing right now, getting clarity on, and I'm actually.
So it has to be relevant to the issue on the floor.
Or it could be, I don't want to make light of this, but there's a fire. Point of information. I mean, there's a fire over there. I think we should all be aware. You know, I don't want to use that example, but but I did because it'll come to mind. I don't know why. I need you all to be aware of something is one reason. I need to take the floor for a moment, seeking some information.
Because it's different than a point of personal privilege.
Yes, and a point of personal privilege is something we didn't really put on the table for the discussion today, but that is, we generally ask if a point of privilege is going to be raised that you pre-brief it with the chair, though not required, because a member can always seek the floor. But I'm giving myself 1 minute to answer more effectively. It's a point of order is so much easier for me to define.
So if I can just walk this back a little bit. So maybe not the OMB director because it's the mayor's staff, but when we're thinking about Robert's rules, it's thinking about a big convention. And so you have officers where there's a secretary and a treasurer. And so maybe you have a question of the treasurer, which is another member. So in our context, you have a question of the chair of the transportation committee. So it would just be a point of information. I have a question for the chair of the transportation committee. Might be a better example.
Would you say that one more time? Sorry.
So a point of information is typically used like in bigger conventions. You have a secretary and a treasurer, and they're all officers. And so maybe you have a question for the treasurer of the committee, of this organization. In our context, we have committees, and so maybe you have a question for the transportation committee chair. So point of information, I have a question for the
Right. And so I think you really hit on the gist of it there. It's a question. Point of information. I have a question I need to raise about where we are, what's happening, what the time. I'm not exactly sure how to define that other than you know it when you see it. I need some information, I think is the gist. The point of, Mr. Martinez.
Yes, respectfully though, that's not questions about the debate or the subject of the debate or the
Exactly.
debate, right? It's about procedural, where we are, I think is a good way to phrase
It's
it.
not to take the floor for the purpose of debate.
And testimony on the actual item, correct.
And, you know, we have a pretty good, I don't want to say good, there is a track record of the other side trying to use a point of information as an opportunity to debate and add further information. And that's really not the point. And that chair will almost always overrule that. Mr. Presverdia.
Yeah, so this looks helpful to me. This is I can send this out, but it says point of information. This is the point that is most commonly misused. The point is to ask for information that you feel is essential to the understanding of the debate. It may not be used to give information. The member may decide not to answer the question by refusing to yield the floor. Again, it is not in order to give someone information on a point of information. So that's, I mean, there's all kinds of interpretations, but my understanding is that it is a question that is being asked. It is relevant to the current debate on the floor, and that it is not used to provide information, but to request information. So that's my understanding of it. But like I said, I think these are interpreted differently depending on the region of the country you're in, depending on all kinds of things. So, but that's been my understanding. But I think it may be helpful for us to come up with a clarity in terms of how this body wants to function and how we want to use it.
So in our tradition for at least the last 4 or 5 years, point of information is, what is your question? What is your question about the procedure that we're under right now? About the process, where we are? What is your question? And then the point of order is, what rule do you believe has been violated? Is ultimately how we've defined it. Mr. Cross.
I would say the biggest difference is a point of order would require a determination by the chair on the rules.
Well,
And
the
point of
chair,
information is just information in general.
except that under a point of information, that the question could be ruled inadmissible by the chair just as well, right? So it's the
Okay.
chair who determines whether
If
the
it's-
person who doesn't have the floor, who's raising a point of information, is raising a question that is germane and under the rules. The chair can say, no, I'm sorry, that is completely off where we are right now. And then the appeal, here's the part that I
But
was
I think
hoping to
that-
get to.
And I agree, but I think that falls under the general powers of the chair. Which,
Yeah.
which go into several different.
Yes, but under this very specific cause, even under the rules, it says there's no vote required to hear a point of information. The question can be ruled upon by the chair. So whether it's germane and allowed. But what I wanted to really kind of talk about here is the next level part of the conversation. So it's good that we're getting into this. And so it happened last night, I think for the first time since I've been the chair, maybe the motion to override the ruling of the chair.
First time since you've been chair.
Yeah, that's what I said. First time since I've been the chair. And yeah, it happened to Suzanne a couple times, and every chair should experience it just like every mayor should be vetoed and override. Every mayor should have their veto overridden. It's just part of the process. It's like rites of passage. So that said, the reason I wanted to bring this up is timeliness is so important. If you recall Tuesday night, I ruled the mayor out of order when he started to try to correct something that a member had said 5 people before. Right. And so it was the mayor, and it was on the most contentious kind of conversation. We had the most challenging one, not contentious, most challenging because of all the moves. But somebody had said something, and then I had asked a number of other people and went through the queue. Are you into the queue? Another person speaks. Then I come to the mayor. The mayor starts to go back after the person 5 people ago to effectively raise a point of order. I have a complaint about, I think they violated the rules. At that point, it's too late. That's what I'm trying to impress upon folks. The timeliness of your motions is very important in the process, because if the business has already passed, there are ways to get back to the previous business, but not that, because that was a decision made right then and no one complained about it. It's like when we ask, a member makes a disclosure and the disclosure is done and the chair rules. That moment right then is your time to say, I don't agree. But the next process that begins, we pick up the next item, the decision is done. We're not going back unless by mutual agreement, every single member of the body says, yeah, I think we should. But if one person disagrees, that rule is, we moved on. The body can do almost anything except for those things outside of the law that are spelled out in code, by mutual consent, right?
And that's consistent when sometimes we get confused, and I've voted yes when I meant no and stuff, but once the clerk speaks and stuff, it's recorded. You just got to move on. I mean, same
Generally.
thing applies. We're moving on to the new business. That's been, you can't wait. I mean, otherwise there's a very lengthy process to go in and correct that. So
Right, and the order demands that we take care of the business of the moment in the moment and then move on. And then the question can be reconsidered, brought back up. We can have further debate. But so that was one of the key elements. So I think we've talked briefly about point of order and point of information and even point of
Well,
privilege.
I want to go back to point of order, because a point of order is, I think, the only one where you can interrupt the speaker. So in the situation, you can interrupt the speaker and say point of order, and then the chair's explanation at the beginning of the meeting, if a point of order is called, please stop speaking so that I may rule. And so when you call for a point of order, it's applied to any breach of the assembly's rules. So we have some list of rules in the code. And so, for example, if we are laying an item on the table and it's an ordinance, and you know that it needs a first and a second and a third, and the chair stops at a second and says, okay, that item has been introduced, you can say, point of order, doesn't that need a third? And, in that moment, he's going to say, oh, you're right, thanks for saying that. And that would be his ruling is, yes, you're right, we're going to go and get the third now. Another example, if you're speaking and someone else interrupts you and the chair doesn't call them out of order for interrupting you, you can call a point of order. Member A interrupted me when I was speaking, and AMC 230 080 says we don't interrupt. It's breaking the rules of decorum in our rules. And so then the chair then rules. And so the chair rules for these purposes. No, they're not out of order. Then you can appeal the decision of the chair. I appeal the decision of the chair. That needs seconded. And so now we have a motion on the floor to appeal from the decision of the chair. And now we vote. Did the chair rule incorrectly that this interruption was not a breach of the rules? And then that is debatable in some situations. And then a majority or a tie sustains the chair's ruling. So if 6 say yes and 6 say no, then that sustains the ruling of the chair. If 9 say yes and 3 say no, then the chair is overridden.
I would only add one thing, that even a point of information is allowed to interrupt. It's under Roberts in specific, what it says is, it is allowed when another has the floor, but should not interrupt a person who has begun speaking unless unavoidable. Right? So if your question is so important that you feel like you have to interrupt someone, you may ask. That's point of information.
Okay, we jumped because we were just.
No, I know,
Sure.
because
I
what
mean,
she said
point
was,
of information. Somebody has passed out in the audience.
Yeah. exactly.
We need.
Well,
can we?
point
Can
of
we have a?
information is a question. So
Can we have an at ease?
Yeah.
So we can.
Can we have an Eddie's?
you
Right,
know?
exactly. That's a question. And so, fair. Anyhow, I just want to put a slight nuance on all of that, that both of them are interruptible. Point of order is when you believe a rule has been violated and you get the chair will make a ruling. Point of information is when you have a question, you shouldn't use it to interrupt someone, right? If it's avoidable, let the person finish their point. Then you raise your point of information, right? It's like a hierarchy. It's a less important matter, this point of information, unless it is that important.
Right. And I think that we use our point of information fairly loosely.
Liberally, yeah.
Because you're just like, I have a question, and the mayor lets their staff come up and answer the question, right? So that's, we've used that particular one loosely, but it's also available to you for asking parliamentary questions, or where the heck even are we right now? I forgot where I lost track of where we were in this spider web of motions that we're in right now.
Yes, and believe me, the chair misses the point. No one says it, but you're like, they just say, no, we're on the amendment still, right? No one says point of information or what are we on? What part of this are we on? Instead, someone just chimes in, hey, we're on the amendment. Because I will often think we're on the main motion because my mind has already stepped 3 steps forward into the debates. Mr. President.
So just to, quick question, and then unfortunately, I apologize. I need to leave a little early today. I don't want to go down a different trail, but in these conversations we're having about these points, there's this question about who sort of has the floor. And I know that's different in different bodies, but I'm just curious if you could speak briefly to our sort of rules around that. If someone has the floor, do they have to relinquish the floor in order for someone else to speak? Because it's been very common in my experience that I'm speaking and then a variety of things happen, but I don't get the floor back. And the other day, I think Kevin asked, he said, don't I have the floor? And then it was brought back to him, but it's not done in the same way as I've seen in other bodies where you don't get to take the floor away from me. I have the floor and I can continue to have the floor until I am done. How is it different here? How is it that for instance, if I'm speaking and someone says, well, I don't really understand what he's saying, and then it goes to a variety of things, do we still respect it in the same way?
So I can speak to that. The intent is always to give the floor back to the person who had the floor when the interruption began, or even when the member asks a question of another party, right? So say, for example, you have the floor and you ask a question of Mr. Wallens, he's not here, I'll pick on him, and he answers, the floor should come back to you.
Right.
Was your question answered? Are you done?
And you get the floor when you've been recognized by the chair.
Yes.
Like,
And it's like
that's
through the
clarity.
queue, you have the floor, you ask the question, a bunch of interruptions happen. It should always come back to you. And you made a really good point there. Kevin said it the other night. Wait, don't I have the floor? It's quite possible I made the mistake of moving on because I thought you were done, or I didn't even think about it because, again, I was chatting over here trying to figure out the computer.
Right.
And so if it was accidentally removed from you, you should be granted the floor back.
Right.
You make a point of order. Point of order. Hey, I believe I had the floor. And then the chair will do the calculus, do the Rolodex, and then boom, you're right. You have the floor. And so that's like, that is
That you clear the queue as you call on the person.
right. Well, in fact, if the queue is working and we're on a main motion and we haven't had an amendment that's really hot and everyone wants to talk, but we have this queue, I have someone in the queue for the chair shows who has the floor, and it doesn't clear until I add the next person or I remove them manually from the queue. So I have a reminder who had the floor. And so it's a human process. All of these things are a human process, which is why the rules have been established that you need a majority to override the ruling of the chair if a mistake has been made, but you first appeal to the chair. Hey, this is what I think happened. When the chair using reason determines, yeah, it happened that way, then the members all agree, great, or the members don't agree, it's subject to that. But before you leave, and I don't want to, we have to end this conversation soon. Did you have any projects you wanted to brief us on?
No.
Okay, great. So do we want to, is there anything left last? I think the main points are point of information is for asking a question. Point of order is for if you believe a rule has been broken. And timeliness is really the key because if the ship sails, the question sails with it. Okay, Ms. Braga.
So the question Mr. Johnson and I had is, I know that you're saying that we have this agenda together and we've spent a lot of time on whatever item is on the agenda. And then what we're seeing is this, where people are making amendments, amended resolutions that are laid on the table. And the jumping ahead is really troublesome to me. The fact that you weren't done speaking and, it was blatted out there. So
Okay, so
I'm
can I-
not fast. I'm 62 next week.
Can I speak to that real quick?
Yeah.
So I spoke to it earlier. I'll speak to it again. The very specific item was the motion to approve on a public hearing item. So an item in the 14s. And that was the CASA bond proposal. Can be real specific. And so what I'd said earlier, and it's the challenge of our procedure, the consent agenda items, when a member pulls an item, they put themselves in a position to be the one I turn to and say, Ms. Braga, you pulled this item. What is your intent? I move, I postpone. So under the public hearing process and generally speaking, items not on the consent agenda, so that's 11, 12, 13, 14, and 15, those items are all, especially a public hearing items, when we finish the public hearing, the call of the chair is, what's the will of the body? So the mover who has introduced one version or an S version or an S1 version doesn't have precedence. What has precedence is the person who moves the item and is seconded first. And so it does feel a little like a competition for bandwidth. And in that moment, Jasmine and I both conferred. We both, in our minds, we conferred and had the same impression that the mover that first said move to approve and had a second was one set of people. And so
Oh,
that's
absolutely. But we want to know what syllable we're allowed to interrupt you in future meetings.
what's the will of the
Because
body.
you were still talking when the first motion went forward.
So I'll just say it on the record now. I sent a text to Mr. Johnson that said, be ready as soon as I'm done to make the motion, because I'm trying to mentor him to be ready to go and be the first. I sent the text. No, it happened right at the time when I was done. It's the message is, it's really what's the will of the body. It's that phrase. And the chair can exercise the right to turn to a member and say, what's your motion? I could do that, but I generally don't 99 out of 100 times, unless there's a specific reason. The chair sets the agenda and the order. But that said, the process really, and there have been fights over this like raging fights with members getting up and ready to charging over like. And there have been times when somebody made the motion first, but didn't get a second. Someone jumped over them with a motion, and then someone seconded their motion. And even though the first person who moved first, because they didn't get a second first, the other one was the one. Right. And that's, so it's really, it's a navigation between.
I
the-
think it's just, I'm not going to learn this process very easily, and it is frustrating.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
I get it.
I almost watched someone punch someone else over this very item before. Ms. Salatil.
Yeah, so I think it's an inherent part of our job to learn this part because it's how we represent our constituents. And also, I think it applies in one other situation, and it's when there are items for introduction that are laid on the table, because the question isn't, is there a motion to lay this item on the table? It's, is there a motion? Because that's a move to introduce first, second, third, and whoever moves to introduce first, because it's an open question. There are opportunities where there are open questions, and there are opportunities where there are more closed questions. And I think the salient feature with the consent agenda in particular is a member has pulled an item because otherwise we would have approved all of them wholesale. And there's 3 moves you can make on the consent agenda. You can choose to take no action and have it and try to have it die for no action. You can move to approve or you can move to postpone. And that's unique to the consent agenda, whereas all the rest are set with an open question of what is the motion or what is the will of the body.
Okay, so I'm going to jump in here and say, sorry, the clerk had asked, can we make a game for this? And I think probably the point between the two is you have to learn this is maybe we should, like we do the Robert's Rules of Order Jeopardy, come up with some kind of a game process where we just do this so it becomes natural, because I think that's what I'm hearing is just not natural.
I'd like to finish my point, Chris, because I have to go.
All right.
And you just interrupted me.
All right. Sorry, Meg. The chair sustains the point of order. Go ahead.
well, I just feel like we are fairly new to the assembly, and in the spirit of, you know, if her motion, if Daniel's motion, their version was good, then we could fairly, we've got ours, we discuss, and they put theirs forward. And I don't understand trying to beat each other out to be the first. It just, my husband explained it as this. He said, watching that, he was angry. He said it looked like the masters of Dungeon and Dragon quietly scheming a game that other people don't understand.
Right.
So-
And to my point, the master of that dungeon literally sent a text to the person you were working with that said, be ready, be right now, be ready, because I wanted to help mentor him to be on the trigger. And so what you saw was the opposite of what actually happened. And so the feelings are the feelings, and I can't do much about it, but I literally spent time like, Zach, be ready, because I wanted, yeah, I'll make sure. So, and I try not to do text in the meetings because all of the issues that come with that, but that's a procedural issue. It was procedural only. And so, yeah, anyhow, I want you to know that it was the
If I may-
opposite of what it appears. Mr. Salt, and then Mr. Cross, then Mr. Johnson.
Thanks, Mr. Constant. Hey, real quick on a point of clarification. I heard something you said today that it was not only the first person that chimed in, but also the first one that got a second. And that was sort of new to me because I always thought it was the first person chimed in, but I just wanted clarification on that point.
Say that again. Would
To
you
what-
say your
what
question
Karen's
again?
Talking about to what Karen's talking about, if 2 people chime in at the same time, let's say member 1 beats member 2, but member 2 gets a second prior to member 1,
Mm-hmm.
does that mean member 2 is technically in first place?
Yep. It's
Okay,
the
thanks.
the
That's what I
first
wanted to know.
the first motion that is made and seconded is the motion that has the floor.
Okay, thanks.
I don't know. Mr. Gates is looking at me, looking at his.
I just wanted to add that what Mr. Constant described, in the 14s and I guess 13s and 11s, as soon as the item's ready, the question, what's the will of the body? That's not a chair constant procedure. That's a assembly procedure that's been historical ever since I've been on the body. Dick Trainee, he was chair, I think, when I started in 2017, and he was chair 5 different times. That's how he did it as well. So I think it's probably a decades-old practice. So I just wanted to point that out. For good or bad, that's how it's been, as long as I can remember.
So I would just note as well, it's been shared with me that if there are procedural issues you are anticipating or you see conflicts coming, there's always the dinner break. You can say, hey, how do I work with this? Or before the meeting, a point of privilege, we often defer and say, you ask for help. Also, the clerk and counsel is available to help you organize the procedural steps. But I think I don't need it, so I thought we didn't need to do it. It was suggested we gamify this process somehow, and I don't know how we would do that. But it's like, in Jeopardy, you watch the game, you got someone who's standing there doing this, and they just kind of somehow missed it. That is kind of part of this process, and it has created a lot of conflicts in the past, but mostly 100 times, 99 out of 100 times, it works. And so, Mr. Cross, you were next in the queue.
Yeah, Karen, you're absolutely right. Because I remember when I first got on the assembly, I felt like I was just in an avalanche, particularly with all the motions. It was just like, oh my gosh. I'm so fortunate, by the way, that I sit next to Meg because she always knows what's going on. And you take your eyes off the ball or you get distracted for half a second. And it's like, wait a second, what's going on? And so you feel like you're, again, that game show, like I'm going to hit that buzzer. But the one thing I've been, just to give compliment to Chris and Meg, is that even though we'll be, wildly opposed on stuff, if I approach them regarding emotion, what that looks like, you guys have always been very helpful in saying, this is what you have to do. This is what you're going to have to do to position yourself. And I appreciate all the assistance that you've given me. So, and on the other side of that, it's just how helpful this process is in real life. Because as a real estate broker, I've taken what I've learned for Robert Rules and applied it to disputes between realtors and their clients and say, wait, I've got the chair. You're not recognized. You have 3 minutes. And I'm applying this. And it is powerful stuff, by the way. So, I mean, I might apply that to children at some point, but I totally get what you're saying. And particularly when it's late at night. And now we're into the 13s or we're into this and we're doing public testimony. And then you're having to, it gets even harder because you're tired, you're stressed. It's been a long day. And now there's all this scrambling. Yeah. It's
So the wisest amendment to the charter was the one that says the people are immune from actions of the assembly after midnight, because it does get very difficult to stay focused and do the work at 11 o'clock. We're tired, we're cranky, we're hungry, we need some water, and the issues aren't any less difficult. So, Mr. Johnson.
Yeah, thank you. I don't want to belabor this too much here, but I would just like to say first, I did appreciate, Mr. Constant, that you sent me that text, and I was prepared. I was sitting there for a good 2 or 3 minutes with my finger over the mic button so that as soon as you were done speaking, I could make the motion. So I anticipated it. I just simply wasn't quick enough, and which does kind of come back to Karen's question. Is it when you say the why? What if I say what is the will of, and I get in there before body? Again, I don't want to beat that to death right here, but I wasn't asleep at the switch. I was ready. I was just simply preempted in this case.
Yeah, no, I get that.
I am still trying to crystallize my thoughts around this matter, and I just want to say, I might want to bring this up again, but I don't want to beat a dead here. What is permissible and what is best process are not always the same thing.
Yeah, and that all comes back to when you're sitting in the chair and you're sitting next to the clerk, you do the best you can with what you have in the moment. And to go back to what we had, you could have, not that you would and not that it would have prevailed, made a point of order. I have a point of order. I believe I was the first one in the queue. I believe I was the first one with a motion and a second. Say I said, no, I heard it the other way, so I overrule that. Then you could appeal to the body in that moment and say, I believe I was timely. Then you would move to override the ruling of the chair. Then you'd have a second. Then that question would be before the body. And now I forget, is that motion debatable?
In certain circumstances.
Override the ruling of the chair.
Yeah, it's in certain circumstances.
Okay, so that's a gray area. So not to say that you would have or you would have prevailed, but the proper procedure at that moment would have been, I believe I had the floor. I believe I had the second. I moved to override the ruling of the chair. Then it would resolve to the 12 of us the answer of that question. So then it wouldn't be just me, right? And so that gets back nicely, actually, tidily back to where we were. And so I think some practice on this will be good. We'll do it at some point. We'll find a game that helps people make motions. But 99 out of 100 times, I'm going to say, what's the will of the body on an item that just closed? And it's when I'm saying, what's the will of the body? That's your cue. Is it at the W or the Y? I don't think anyone's going to call you out of order if you're speaking when I say what's. But you might sometimes find yourself when I say something else that you're like looking funny, but whatever, it doesn't matter. Because I might actually say something else, because who knows? Oh my God, we're going to run out of time. I need a motion to extend. And you know, whatever. But practically speaking, I don't think anyone would call you out of order if I start to say, what's the will of the body? And you are Johnny on the spot. Early, but not before I say, what's the will of the body? And ultimately it's what's the public hearing is now closed. What's the will of the body? Those are two steps that have to occur. But again, I want to go back to where I started all of this. Despite what it might feel like, the goodwill and the work, I don't know what the right word is, workliness, ability to work together of this body is, to my assessment, good and remarkable compared to where we have been. And so lean into that as much as possible and figure out through that frame how to answer these questions, and we'll all be stronger for it. So, okay, now we have the last
Point
part
of
of our
information
agenda.
is 2:55.
Yeah, we have just a few more minutes. That conversation took longer. Is there anyone on the phone for audience participation? No. Okay, so there's nobody here from the public to be heard. Okay, so normally we would spend the next 15 minutes, but we're out of time talking about projects. So does anyone feel a burning need to describe a project they're working on? All right, so
I will just share that it was reported at the assembly meeting that Member Brong and myself were working on some things around, I'll just use the language peace, a peace resolution. I would say that from the tradition of the bridge builder spirit of our community, we're approaching trying to help different sides of our community find a pathway forward to a good, reasonable discussion. And we will continue to pursue it from that very bridge builder perspective. But this question did raise a historical analysis lens for me. And the first thing that popped into my mind when I was really looking at this was like, what the heck did Anchorage say about apartheid? Really, like, because there was this, and you know what? We have a history of saying things about all sorts of stuff. But the most important thing that I think we have a history of is finding a way to bring the uniqueness of our community together to learn and to educate and to have mutual understanding. And that really is the bridge builder tradition, both in terms of the organization of bridge builders, but the values and the spirit. So on that lens, we're approaching meeting with folks and having discussions around that conversation from that vantage point. I just wanted to make sure we're clear on the record about that. Thank you.
Floor.
So the Nordic Skiing Association resolution is going to be on the agenda if anyone wants to be on it as well, recognizing their 60 years. And I had this song rolling around in my head after the last meeting. After it's been 2 meetings in a row that I got yelled at. And so here's my song.
Can't hear it.
Oh, the why you gotta be so mean.
Oh, gotcha. Yeah. Yeah, no, people have edges. I had a meeting yesterday with the director of API and about a new program that they're putting in the middle of my neighborhood that sounds really awful. And I sent him an email that was as sharp edged as you could be. And then I ended it with, but I'm going to withhold my judgment until I hear from you. And, you know, when I heard from him, it wasn't as bad as it sounded like through the media. And he's like, but your email was so rough. And I said, because if you were going to do what was told to me, I would come at you with everything I have, and it would be a real battle. And so we have rough edges sometimes. Not yet. I'm going to let them get it on the ground first and then have a conversation with us. But anyhow, thank you, everybody. Anyone else? You trying to volunteer them to speak about a project? Uh-huh. Anyone else? Hearing, seeing none. We'll see you
Tuesday.
next week.
Was it throwing rocks for?
We're adjourned.